My name is Maya Washington. I'm 34 years old, a product manager at a tech firm in Atlanta, and for most of my life, I believed one simple thing. If you work hard enough and stay quiet enough, eventually the people who love you will notice. That night, I found out how wrong I was. It happened at my own housewarming party, the party celebrating the house I'd spent 18 years earning. My sister walked through my front door with 2 suitcases, her husband behind her, and my mother's voice already ringing in my ear before I even understood what was happening. We said they could live here. Minutes later, my mother's text confirmed it in 5 cold words. Don't make a scene. Here's the part nobody at that party knew. This wasn't a sudden decision. It was a plan. Quietly written months before I ever signed the paperwork on this house, and somewhere in a folded piece of paper I hadn't found yet, my own sister had already put it in writing. By the next morning, I'd find that paper, and by the next afternoon, every suitcase they'd carried into my house would be rolling right back out the door, packed by my own hands. Before we get into the story, sit with that for a second. Because if you've ever given everything to your family and still felt like it was never enough, you're going to feel every part of what happened next. Let me take you back to where it started. It was the last Saturday in March, and Atlanta was doing that thing it does in early spring, where the air still has a little bite to it in the evening, but the dogwoods have already decided winter's over. I remember standing in my new kitchen around 6 o'clock, barefoot on the hardwood, holding a glass of sparkling cider, watching the caterer set out trays of pimento cheese and deviled eggs on the island I'd picked out myself. The house sat on a quiet street in Virginia Highland, the kind of block where the porches are wide, the yards are green, and the neighbors still wave at you from their rocking chairs. 4 bedrooms, a sunroom I'd already claimed as my reading nook, a backyard just big enough for the fire pit I'd been dreaming about since I was 22, living in a 1-bedroom in East Point, working 2 jobs and telling myself, one day. 18 years is a long time to hold on to a dream like that. I started as an entry-level analyst at a logistics company near the airport. The kind of job where you answer phones and file reports and pray somebody notices you're capable of more. I climbed. I got certifications on nights and weekends, I changed companies twice, negotiated hard both times, and landed at a tech firm in Midtown as a product manager, making the kind of salary that used to feel like a fantasy number when I was a girl watching my parents stretch every dollar in our house in College Park. I saved for 6 years. 6 years of brown bag lunches and driving with the check engine light on like it was a permanent fixture on my dash. 6 years of watching friends buy houses and post the photos while I told myself, not yet, almost there. Then, in January, it happened. I closed on 1,847 square feet of undeniable proof that I'd made it. I spent nearly 2 months picking out furniture and paint, sage green for the living room, warm white for the bedrooms, and planning every detail of the party that would mark the night I finally, truly arrived. That Saturday, my house was full. My best friend Renee flew in from Charlotte. Half my department showed up. My neighbor, Miss Betty, 2 doors down, a retired school teacher who'd been trying to get me to try her peach cobbler recipe since the day I moved in, brought a whole cobbler wrapped in foil, for luck, and told me my porch swing reminded her of the one on her mother's porch, which had been creaking, in her words, since the Eisenhower administration, and don't you dare replace it. Some things are supposed to creak. My cousin Marcus Jr. ran the speaker system, an old-school R&B mix that had half the living room swaying. I remember standing near my new fireplace in a cream midi dress, having my photo taken by Renee, laughing at something she'd said, feeling, for maybe the first time in my adult life, completely, fully proud of myself. That's when the front door opened. I didn't hear a knock. I didn't hear the doorbell. I heard wheels, suitcase wheels, rolling across my new hardwood floor. I turned and there was my sister, Aaliyah, standing in my foyer with a smile so wide and so easy that for half a second I actually smiled back out of pure reflex, the way you do when someone you love walks into a room. She was dressed for brunch, not moving day. Ripped jeans, gold hoops, a crop top under her jacket. Behind her stood her husband, Darius, holding 2 large suitcases, his eyes already dropping to the floor like he didn't want to be looking at me when this happened. Behind him, holding hands, were my niece and nephew, Nia, 4, in a tiny puffer coat, and Jamal, 6, clutching a stuffed dinosaur like it was the only stable thing in the room. The music didn't stop right away, but the people nearest the door noticed, and the room went quiet in that particular way a room goes quiet when everyone senses something's about to happen and nobody wants to react first. Aaliyah's voice rang out clear and easy, like she was announcing good news. "Mom said we could stay here," she said. "We're moving in tonight." I remember the exact sensation, the floor seeming to tilt just slightly, the way it does when an elevator drops faster than you expect. I forced my mouth into a smile, because I had 30 guests in my living room, and I wasn't about to let my sister turn my housewarming into a scene. "Aaliyah," I said, low, "can we talk in the kitchen?" She didn't move toward the kitchen. She rolled her suitcase further in, looked around at my furniture, my rug, my curtains, and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "This place is huge. We'll help you out with the kids while we're here. You don't have kids yet, so you don't really know how hard it is." A few coworkers exchanged glances. Miss Betty tilted her head, confused, cobbler still in her hands. Renee's mouth fell open slightly from across the room. Aaliyah kept going, giving a tour of a house that wasn't hers. She told my coworker Denise, "I actually told her to get these curtains. They go so much better with the wood tones in here." Then she looked toward the backyard, toward the fire pit I'd dreamed about for 6 years, and said, "That yard's going to be perfect for the kids to play in." I stood there holding my glass of cider, smiling at my guests, while something in my chest cracked quietly down the middle. Here's the strange thing. My mind didn't go to anger first. It went to a memory. 2 months earlier, before I'd even closed on the house, Aaliyah and Darius had come to a walkthrough. She'd asked a lot of questions that day, more than made sense for someone just there to be supportive. Questions about the school district, whether Virginia Highland Elementary had good ratings, whether the neighborhood felt safe for young kids. At the time I thought, that's sweet, she's excited for me. Standing in my foyer now, watching her introduce my rugs to my own guests, that memory didn't feel sweet anymore. It felt like something else. I didn't have a name for it yet. I stepped out onto my front porch for air, my phone already cold in my hand. I called my mother. 4 rings, then voicemail. I called again, straight to voicemail. 5 minutes later, a text. "Don't make a scene. Your sister and the kids need a place to stay. You have the room. Help your family for once." Help your family for once. I stood there in the cool March air, staring at those 5 words glowing on my screen, while inside, the party I'd planned for 2 months carried on without me, and my sister rearranged my furniture with her eyes. I didn't know it yet, standing there with my phone in my hand, but that sentence, "Mom said we could stay here," wasn't the beginning of something sudden. It was the final line of a plan written long before I ever picked a paint color. And the woman who wrote the first draft of that plan wasn't even in the house. If you've ever had someone in your family treat your success like it belonged to them too, stay with me. Because what I found the very next morning, folded inside a 4-year-old's jacket pocket, is going to change how you see everything that came before it. I didn't sleep.
Oh my God, this can't
I lay
be
in my
real.
new bedroom,
How
the one
could
I'd
this
picked for the morning
happen?
light, and listened to my own house sound unfamiliar. Cabinet doors at 11 at night, a child crying somewhere down the hall, my sister's voice murmuring through walls that were supposed to only ever hold my own quiet. By 6:30, I gave up and went downstairs. Aaliyah and Darius were already at my kitchen island with coffee, like they'd lived there for years instead of hours. Jamal and Nia ran laps across my living room, Nia's socked feet sliding on the hardwood I'd had refinished 6 weeks earlier. Aaliyah looked up, smiling the same easy smile from the night before, like none of this was strange at all. "Morning," she said, stirring her cream. "Hey, I need a copy of your key today. I leave early for work. I'm not standing outside waiting on you every morning. The kids need stability." She glanced toward the hallway. "You should probably move to the guest room. The master's bigger, makes more sense for them." I didn't argue. I nodded, told them to head to work, and asked what time they'd be back. The second their car cleared the driveway, I called my manager, said I had a family emergency, and went upstairs. I pulled every suitcase out of the guest closet and started packing up everything that wasn't mine. I want to be honest about something. This wasn't rage, not yet. It was quieter than that. A kind of clarity I'd never felt before. My hands moved on their own, folding Darius's shirts, zipping Aaliyah's makeup bag, gathering the kids' toys into a bin. I was folding Naya's pink puffer jacket, the one I bought her myself last Christmas with my year-end bonus, when I remembered, out of nowhere, how a year ago, Jamal used to call my old upright vacuum the Dragon, and begged to be the one to slay it on Saturday mornings while I cleaned. That memory sat strange in my chest now, folding his sister's coat. Whatever this had become, it hadn't always been this. I'd loved those kids before any of it started. That part hadn't gone anywhere. It just made everything else hurt more. Something crinkled under my fingers in the jacket pocket. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a printed screenshot, a text conversation between Aaliyah and my mother dated 4 months earlier, right around the time I'd signed the contract on the house. Aaliyah, Mom, I already asked Maya a bunch of questions about the schools out there in Virginia Highland. When she moves in, just tell her you said it's okay for us to stay with her for a while. The kids need stability. She won't say no. I stood there holding it, completely still, while everything else in me went cold. This wasn't my mother caving to pressure at my front door. This had been discussed, written down. Before I'd moved a single box into this house, my sister and my mother had already decided how they were going to use it. What made this discovery so devastating wasn't the plan itself. It was what it exposed about my whole life up to that point. For 34 years, I'd built my identity around being useful, quietly believing that if I gave enough, I'd finally earn the one thing that should never have needed earning: being loved without conditions. Finding that note didn't just reveal my sister's scheme. It confirmed a fear I'd never said out loud, that in this family, I had never been a daughter or a sister. I had been a resource. And underneath that fear was a want I could barely admit to myself. I wanted, just once, to matter simply for being me, not for what I could give. Here's the thing about being the responsible one in a family, the one who always says yes. You start to believe your compliance is a personality trait instead of something built into you, piece by piece, over years of being told that saying no makes you selfish. Standing in that guest room, I felt something shift. Not anger exactly, more like waking up. I thought about every Sunday dinner I'd left early to pick up Jamal because Aaliyah had a headache. Every work trip cut short because Mom said the kids needed me. Every dollar I'd sent because someone in my family had decided that since I didn't have children of my own yet, my time simply belonged to whoever needed it more. I had given, and not once had anyone thanked me for it. It had just been expected. I finished packing every suitcase, taped that folded paper to the outside of one of them, called a courier, and shipped everything straight to my parents' house in College Park. On top, I left one note in my own handwriting. Don't make a scene. I'm not a free babysitter. Less than 2 hours later, my phone rang. Aaliyah sobbing. Jamal and Nia crying somewhere behind her. What did you do? She said, voice breaking. The kids cried all night. No beds, no toys. You're their aunt. How could you? I sat on the edge of my bed, phone to my ear, and bit down on the inside of my cheek to keep from saying anything at all. My phone buzzed with another call, my mother. Are you seriously trying to put your sister and those babies out on the street? She said, voice hard as stone. After everything this family did for you? The money we gave you for college, and you can't help your own sister for a few months? I have to go, Mom, I said, and I hung up. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty after hanging up on my mother. I felt still, like I'd finally set down something I'd been carrying so long, I'd forgotten it had weight. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought a folded piece of paper and a guilt trip over the phone was as bad as this drama family story would get. 3 days later, an email arrived from a lawyer I'd never heard of, writing on behalf of my parents. And what it claimed, about $35,000, would unravel a story I'd believed my entire adult life. Would you have shipped those suitcases back the same day? Team Maya or Team Aaliyah? Drop your answer below before you find out what happens next. The letter's subject line read, "Regarding family financial matter." I read it twice in my car in the office parking garage on Peachtree Street because the first time I genuinely thought I'd misunderstood. Written on behalf of my parents, it said that if I didn't allow Aaliyah, Darius, and their children to move back in, my parents would seek repayment of $35,000, money the letter called a loan for my college tuition. $35,000, money I had never once in 18 years heard described as a loan. I called the one person in my family I still trusted completely, my Aunt Zora, my father's younger sister, out in Decatur, who had never once in my whole life made me feel like my worth was conditional on what I could do for someone else. I read her the letter. She went quiet in a way that told me she already knew something I didn't. "Maya," she said slowly, "that $35,000 was never a loan. It was your grandmother's money. Grandma Odessa's inheritance, split evenly between you and Aaliyah, written into her will for education. I've got a copy. I've been going through your grandmother's old estate paperwork since your parents asked me to help settle a storage unit last spring, and some of your parents' files got mixed in with hers." I sat there in the gray light of that garage, feeling the ground shift under a story I'd believed for 18 years. "They gave me my half," I said. "Where did Aaliyah's go?" "Most of it went to her wedding. The rest covered debts after. When you graduated and moved into your first apartment, they told you it was a loan you'd owe back eventually, so you'd feel obligated. That was never true. It was your inheritance, free and clear, both of you." Something hot rose behind my eyes. "There's more, isn't there? Remember your first year out, in that little apartment in East Point, when Mom said Aaliyah needed help with rent because of the new baby?" "I remember. You sent her almost your whole paycheck for 2 years, Maya, because Mom told you that's what a good sister does, that a single woman without kids has no excuse not to help." I did the math in my head. 2 years. Nearly my full salary month after month for a life I wasn't part of because I'd been told it was my duty. This kind of drama family secret doesn't usually surface until somebody finally asks the right question, and I'd never once thought to ask it. Zora paused. "There's one more thing I think you need to see." A minute later, a photo came through. A screenshot of an old email. My father to my mother, 5 years earlier, right around the time I'd bought my first condo in Sandy Springs. "Once Maya gets a bigger place down the line, we'll figure out a way to get Aaliyah and the kids moved in with her. She's single, no kids of her own. There's no real reason she can say no to helping her sister." I sat there a long time, just staring at those words. 5 years. Not a plan that started the week I bought this house. Not even one that started with Aaliyah's questions at the walkthrough. My own father had written this down 5 years before any of it happened, while I was still working 2 jobs, still years from affording the home they were already quietly planning to hand over to someone else. It wasn't loud anger I felt. It was colder than that and clearer. My family hadn't failed to see me. They'd see me exactly right, as a resource, a fallback. The daughter who could always be counted on to say yes, because no had never been presented to me as an option. I called a lawyer that afternoon, a friend of Renee's who worked out of an office near Pont City Market. I brought her the will, the old email, and the letter. She read through everything, then looked up. "Your grandmother's will is clear," she said. "This was a designated inheritance, not a loan. There's no promissory note here, no signature, nothing that would hold up. Your parents have no legal claim to that money. As for pressuring you to house your sister, no court in Georgia is going to force an adult to take relatives into her home. This letter is meant to scare you into compliance, not to win in front of a judge." I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 18 years. I walked out of that office with copies of the will under my arm, feeling, for the first time since that party, like solid ground existed under me. I thought the worst part was behind me. I thought once I had the truth on paper, this would finally start to settle. I had no idea my family wasn't finished. That while I walked out of that lawyer's office feeling steady, they were already starting a different kind of attack. One that wouldn't come through letters, but through whispers. If you've ever found the truth and thought that would be the end of it, stay close. Because what happened next didn't just threaten my house, it threatened my name. I want to tell you something about silence, because I think people misunderstand it. For years, I believed my silence was strength, that keeping the peace made me the bigger person. After that lawyer's office, I sent my mother one final message, calm, direct. I knew the truth now about the money, and if she or Aaliyah kept demanding it or kept insisting I house them, I'd have no choice but to protect myself. I sent it at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning from my desk, and then I did something strange. I went back to work like nothing had happened. Answered emails, sat through a product review meeting where I nodded at slides about quarterly conversion rates, while underneath the table, my leg wouldn't stop bouncing. My coworker Priya leaned over around 11 and asked if I was feeling okay, said I looked like I hadn't slept. I told her allergies. She didn't believe me, but she let it go, and I was grateful for that small mercy. Someone in my life who noticed something was wrong and didn't demand an explanation for it. I thought that message would end things. Instead, it opened a door I didn't expect. Within a week, cousins I hadn't spoken to in months were texting me. My phone would buzz against the wood of my desk at odd hours, during meetings, at 2 in the morning, and each time I'd feel my stomach drop before I even looked at the screen, some old animal instinct already bracing for impact. A story had started moving through the family group chat, then into the pews of the church my mother had attended in College Park for over 20 years. The story that I'd thrown my own sister and her small children into the street out of jealousy, because Aaliyah had a husband and kids, and I, at 34, had neither. Somewhere along the way it turned uglier, that I'd done it because I was interested in Darius myself. I sat in my car outside my office on West Peachtree Street, reading a text from a cousin asking, gently, "Is it true what they're saying about you and Darius?" Something in my chest went hollow. 18 years of never speaking ill of anyone in my family, and now my name, the one thing I had left that was entirely mine, was being dragged through a story I had no part in writing. I remembered something then, small and strange, from the walkthrough 2 months before the housewarming. Aaliyah had been standing in what would become my kitchen, running her hand along the countertop, and she'd said, almost to herself, "Just wait, this'll all make sense later." I'd laughed it off at the time, thought she meant the house, the mortgage, the years of saving finally paying off. Sitting in my car now, that sentence didn't sound like encouragement anymore. It sounded like someone quietly narrating a plan she already knew the ending to. By now, you already know this drama family isn't just about a spare room. It's about who gets to write the story and who gets stuck living inside somebody else's version of it. That evening, I called Renee before I could talk myself out of it. She picked up on the second ring, background noise of her own kids somewhere behind her, a cabinet door closing. "Say it plain," she said. "What's actually happening?" I told her about the rumor, the texts, the thing about Darius. There was a pause on her end long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Maya," she finally said, "you have spent 18 years being the one who never causes a problem. You are allowed one time to let them be the ones who look bad. You didn't write that rumor. You don't have to carry it like you did." It wasn't a big speech. It wasn't supposed to be. But something in the plainness of it, Renee's voice, steady over the sound of her own kitchen, no drama in it at all, settled something in my chest that had been buzzing for days. I hung up feeling, for the first time since the housewarming, like I could breathe through my nose again. 3 days later, my mother invited me to dinner to clear the air. I went early, steadier than I'd felt in weeks, needing to look everyone in the eye and know exactly what I was dealing with. I remember the drive out to College Park more clearly than almost anything else that year. The sun low and orange through the windshield, turning the kudzu along the highway the color of a bruise healing. I passed the strip mall where I used to get my hair done as a teenager, the church my mother still attended, the elementary school Aaliyah and I had both walked to as kids, holding hands at the crosswalk because our mother told us to, and we always did what she told us. Darius was alone on the porch when I pulled up, smoking a cigarette he clearly didn't want seen, the ember glowing brighter each time he pulled on it in the fading light. The porch light above him buzzed faintly, one of those old yellow bulbs that draws moths, and a couple of them were already circling it, throwing small, shifting shadows across the boards. Somewhere down the block, cicadas were starting up their evening static, and I could hear, faintly, through the screen door behind him, the tinny sound of a cartoon playing. Jamal's show, the one with the dinosaurs, the one he never missed. Something in me softened and ached at the same time, hearing it. Whatever this had become between the adults, that little boy in front of the television didn't know any of it. He was still just a kid who liked his show and his stuffed dinosaur and, I hoped, still liked his aunt. Darius stopped me before I reached the door. "Maya, can I talk to you a second?" He wouldn't quite meet my eyes at first. He kept flicking ash off the end of the cigarette, even when there wasn't any to flick. A habit, I realized, of a man who needed his hands to do something, while his mouth caught up to what he was about to say. The evening light was fading behind the pines in my parents' backyard, going that deep gold color that never lasts more than 10 minutes. He let out a long breath. "I should have told you this weeks ago." He said the plan hadn't been spur of the moment. Aaliyah and my mother had discussed it for months, and it wasn't only about needing a place to stay. Aaliyah wanted the kids enrolled in the Virginia Highland School District specifically because, in her words to him, it would be harder to kick out a family once the kids are settled in the local schools. I felt my jaw tighten before I'd even fully processed the words, that old reflex of trying to keep my face still no matter what landed on me. I thought of the walkthrough again, her questions about the school ratings, the neighborhood safety, the questions I'd mistaken for excitement. It had never been excitement. It had been reconnaissance. "There's something else." He pulled out his phone, hands not quite steady, the screen's glow lighting up the underside of his face in the near dark. 2 weeks ago, Aaliyah re-registered the kids' school enrollment using your address. She used an old piece of mail that got forwarded to your house, a utility statement in your name, as proof of residency. And she filed for a couple of state assistance programs listing your place as where they live. He turned the phone toward me. Enrollment confirmations, benefit applications, official documents, every one listing my house, the one I'd worked 18 years to earn, as the legal residence of my sister's children. I scrolled slowly, my thumb leaving a faint smudge on the glass, reading my own address typed out in some government form's rigid little font, over and over, like it belonged to someone else's life. "I'm telling you now," he added quietly, "because my name's on some of that same paperwork. If this comes apart, I don't want to be standing in the middle of it not knowing what happened." Darius wasn't a cruel man. He was a frightened one. For years, he'd chosen silence because standing up to Aaliyah's side of the family always cost him more than he could afford. Her anger, her mother's coldness, the quiet threat of being frozen out of his own children's lives. But fear has a strange way of turning into honesty once it runs out of room. The moment his own name showed up on paperwork he'd never approved, protecting himself and protecting me suddenly pointed in the exact same direction. That, finally, was louder than his fear of Aaliyah ever was. I stood there holding a stranger's phone, staring at my own address on a government form I'd never seen, never signed, never agreed to. Somewhere behind us, through the screen door, I heard Jamal laugh at something on the television, a small, bright sound completely unaware of what his mother had built around it. I want you to understand what that felt like. This wasn't guilt trips and rumors anymore. My sister had gone around me entirely, using a piece of my own mail and official systems to start building a paper trail, one that might make it harder someday for me to ever ask them to leave. I handed Darius his phone back. My hand, I noticed, wasn't shaking anymore. Somewhere in the last 2 months, I'd run out of shock to spend on this family. I walked back inside, past my father, silent in his recliner as always, the television throwing blue light across his face. Past Aaliyah at the kitchen table, fork clinking softly against a plate of my mother's cornbread, smiling at me like nothing was wrong. I stopped in front of my mother. The room went that particular kind of quiet, where you can hear the refrigerator humming, my father's show murmuring low in the background, a car passing outside. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I am not your good daughter anymore, I said, clear and even. I am not the one you get to move around like furniture. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Aaliyah's smile dropped like a curtain falling. My father, for the first time all evening, looked up from the television. My mother's eyes filled, but for the first time in my life, her tears didn't move me an inch. I turned around and walked out, past Darius still on the porch, not looking at him, out to my car in the driveway. I drove home down streets that suddenly felt different, my hands finally steady on the wheel, the radio playing something I didn't register at all, just noise filling the space where my old guilt used to sit. I thought, driving home, that I'd said everything that needed saying. I thought the confrontation was the end of it. I had no idea that walking out that door would set something larger in motion, something that would show me the true size of what my family had been quietly planning, not just for that year, but for the rest of my life. If you've ever stood up for yourself and thought the hardest part was over, stay with me. The deepest layer of this story was still waiting. The drive home felt different than any I'd taken before.
God, yes!
The streetlights on I-285 blurred past in long orange streaks, and somewhere past the Sandy Springs exit, I realized my shoulders had come down from around my ears for the first time in weeks. I didn't cry. I felt something rare and clear. I had chosen myself. The first few days after, my body didn't quite believe what my mind already knew. Twice that week, something small and funny happened at work. A client typo, a coworker's ridiculous voicemail, and my thumb moved toward my mother's name in my phone before I caught myself mid-motion and set the phone face down on my desk instead. Old habits don't leave just because you've decided something. They linger in your hands a little longer than they linger in your heart. In the weeks after, most of my extended family stopped speaking to my parents and Aaliyah. A few cousins reached out privately, said they'd never believed the rumor, apologized for doubting me. My cousin Marcus Jr., the one who'd run the speaker system at my housewarming, who had no idea that night what he was really the soundtrack to, sent a simple text. Whatever happened, I know you, and I know it wasn't what they said. I read it 3 times before I answered. Darius filed for divorce from Aaliyah almost exactly 3 months after that night on the porch. He called once, near the end. I'm sorry I stayed quiet as long as I did, he said. I hope you find peace. A week after that, he sent me one more message. No explanation attached, just a photo. Jamal, gap-toothed, grinning, holding up a small white tooth pinched between 2 fingers like a trophy. He asked me to tell you he lost it eating an apple. Said you'd think it was funny. I sat with that photo open on my phone longer than I meant to, feeling something twist in my chest that had nothing to do with Aaliyah or my mother at all. Just missing a 6-year-old who used to call my vacuum a dragon, who had no idea any of this was happening around him. I saved the photo. I didn't reply. Some doors I still wasn't ready to leave cracked open, even a little. I blocked Darius's number a few weeks later, not out of anger, but out of something calmer, a decision to close a door that no longer needed to stay open. I no longer felt guilty about that. I understood now that keeping a relationship alive out of guilt is just another version of being used. I put my energy into work that summer. I was promoted to senior product manager. I used part of my bonus to finally put in the hot tub I'd wanted since the day I first walked through that backyard. My Aunt Zora came by most Sunday afternoons, and we'd sit on the porch, the one Miss Betty swore reminded her of her mother's, drinking sweet tea, the glass sweating in the humidity until it left rings on the armrest, cicadas going steady in the trees behind us. Zora would tell me stories about my grandmother Odessa, how she'd raised 2 daughters mostly alone after my grandfather passed, working double shifts at a textile mill outside Atlanta for over a decade so her girls could go to college. Zora had her mother's hands, she told me once, holding hers up to the porch light. Short nails, wide knuckles, hands built for work, not decoration. And she said Odessa used to say a woman's hands should never look like they belonged to somebody who'd been idle her whole life. Zora told me the will hadn't just been about money. It had been about making sure both her granddaughters had the same chance to build something free and clear, with no strings attached. "She'd be proud of you," Zora said one evening, dreadlocks catching the last light. "Not because of the house, because you finally said no." I noticed, one of those Sunday afternoons, that Zora went quiet in a way that didn't quite match the conversation. Her eyes somewhere past the fence line, her sweet tea untouched a beat too long. I asked if she was all right. She said she was tired, that there was a lot still settling from the divorce paperwork she was helping sort through. I let it go. I didn't know yet that she was already sitting on something she wasn't ready to hand me. I sat with that for a long time. For most of my life, I'd believed saying no to my family was the same as betraying them. It took losing almost everything, my privacy, my peace, nearly my reputation, to understand that boundaries were never a betrayal. They were the thing I had been missing the whole time. Every drama family has that one relative who finally tells the truth once they've got nothing left to lose. For me, it turned out to be the ones who'd been quietly telling the truth about themselves all along. Some Saturdays that summer, I baked. Miss Betty had roped me into contributing something for the church bazaar 2 streets over, and my first attempt at an apple pie came out with a crust like shoe leather, which she laughed about for a solid week, flour still dusted on her forearms, the kitchen thick with the smell of cinnamon and burnt sugar from the batch before. "Baby, even Odessa's first pie was a disaster," she told me. "Give it 3 more tries." I gave it 4, and the 4th one wasn't bad at all. The crust golden, the kitchen finally smelling like something I'd actually gotten right. I thought, sitting out there those quiet summer evenings, that I'd finally reached the end of the story. I thought I understood the full shape of what my family had tried to take from me. I was wrong. There was one more layer waiting, the deepest one, and it would come from the one person who'd never once let me down. If you've ever thought you'd finally found peace, only to discover one last piece of truth waiting for you, stay close. What Zora told me next changed how I understood every year that came before it. By early summer, my life had settled into something entirely my own. I was dating a man named Elijah Carter, a software engineer I'd met through a mutual friend. Elijah had a habit that undid me a little every time. He was the first person in my adult life who ever asked, "What do you want for yourself?" instead of, "What can you do for everyone else?" I remember one ordinary Tuesday that summer, nothing special about it at all, when he came over after work and found me standing at the kitchen island staring at a stack of mail I hadn't opened in 3 days. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just pulled out the stool across from me, poured us both a glass of the sweet tea Zora had taught me to make, and started sorting the mail into piles without being asked. Bills, junk, things that needed my signature. Quietly, like it was the most natural thing in the world to just help without being asked to. I sat there watching him do it and thought about how long it had been since anyone in my life had given without first deciding what they'd get back. I threw myself a small birthday dinner that June, inviting only the people who actually showed up for me. Renee, Zora, a few close coworkers, Elijah, even Miss Betty, who brought a second cobbler, because one wasn't going to be enough for a table like that. Candles flickering along the center of the table, the low hum of everyone talking over each other, Renee's laugh carrying above it all the way it always did. Sitting there, surrounded by people who saw me clearly, something settled in my chest I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Then, one afternoon in July, Zora called and asked if she could come by. She looked tired when she sat down across from me at my kitchen table, the afternoon light slanting hard through the window behind her, catching the gray starting to come in at her temples, and she didn't waste time. "I need to tell you something I've been sitting on," she said. During the divorce, Darius gave his lawyer a recording, something he caught by accident on his phone, from a family meeting your parents had with their attorney, weeks before your housewarming. His lawyer passed a copy to mine, and mine passed it to me because it names me too. She set her phone on the table between us, screen up, and pressed play. The audio was thin, a little muffled, the sound of a room with hard floors and not much furniture, An office, maybe, or a conference room. There was the scrape of a chair. Someone clearing their throat. Then my mother's voice, closer to the phone's mic than the others, asking the family attorney what it would take to make me permanently responsible for the kids if Aaliyah ever fell on hard times or divorced. My father's voice, further back, quieter, agreeing with something I couldn't fully make out. Then Aaliyah, her voice unmistakable even through the tinny recording, floating the idea of using the best interest of the children to pressure a court into requiring me, as their aunt, to provide housing or support indefinitely, because I was single and had no children of my own. I sat very still while it played, my hand wrapped so tight around my mug that I could feel the ceramic pressing a ring into my palm. I didn't breathe until it stopped. Zora paused the recording. I asked my own attorney about this after Darius's team sent it over, she said. She told me straight, that's not how family law works. A court can't compel an aunt to house or fund her sister's kids just because a relative asks. It was never a real plan with legal teeth. It was wishful thinking dressed up as strategy. But it tells you exactly how they saw you. My mother never saw herself as someone stealing my future. In her mind, she was simply holding the family together the only way she knew how, by deciding, on everyone's behalf, who owed what to whom. Underneath that control was a fear she never once spoke aloud, that a family only survives if someone is forced to carry it. She wasn't protecting Aaliyah. She was protecting an idea of family that only worked if one daughter never got to stop giving. And she chose that idea over me, a long time before I ever knew there was a choice to be made. I sat there at my own kitchen table, sunlight falling in long afternoon stripes across the floor, and I finally understood the full shape of what had been built around me, one quiet assumption at a time for years. I thought back unbidden to that first night, Aaliyah standing in my foyer, looking out at my backyard, saying that yard's going to be perfect for the kids to play in. She hadn't been admiring my house that night. She'd been describing a plan already years old, one my own father had put in writing before I'd even saved enough for a down payment. This had never only been about a house, or $35,000, or a rumor in a group chat. What my parents and my sister had actually pictured, patiently, over years, was a version of my life where I never got to stop being useful to them, because somewhere along the way, they'd decided a woman without children of her own has no real claim to her own future. It wasn't only anger I felt. It was something closer to standing at the edge of a life I'd almost walked straight into without ever knowing I had a choice. I sat outside that evening by the hot tub, steam rising thin into the cooling air, the same spot where I'd grieved and found relief all summer, and I let myself cry. Not the kind of tears that come from weakness, but the kind that come from understanding exactly how close you came to disappearing into someone else's plan for you. A few weeks later, on an evening warm enough that we'd strung little lights along the fence just for the look of it, Elijah proposed right there in that backyard. I said yes before he finished the question. I haven't spoken to my parents or my sister since that dinner on the porch. Some relatives still tell me family comes first, no matter what. If this drama family story stirred something in you, you already know it isn't that simple. This story reminds us that family, in the second half of life, isn't measured by blood. It's measured by who actually shows up. If you're holding a folder of paperwork nobody's sorted through since your husband or wife passed, don't let it sit in a drawer. Call a local elder law attorney or your bank's trust officer this month and put your wishes down in writing, clearly, in your own words, so no one else ever gets to write your story for you. If there's a neighbor, a niece, or an old friend from church who calls just to check on you, not because they need something, invite them over for coffee this week and tell them, plainly, that it matters to you. And if someone in your family only calls when they want something, you're allowed to let that call go to voicemail. You don't owe an explanation to anyone for choosing your own peace. Dignity at this stage of life isn't loud. It looks like a porch swing that still creaks, a pie that finally turns out right, and a door you get to decide for yourself who walks through.